The following program is brought to you in conjunction with the folks at Grace to All with Paul Gray. Now we bring to you the Agape Guy Show with your host, Lenny Manning.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love.
Hello and welcome to the Agape Guy Show. I'm your host, Lenny Manning. Today I'm going to be talking about another controversial subject, so once again, viewer discretion is advised. Well, today I'm going to be talking about reassessing tithing. Yet before I get into this discussion, I'd like to tell you about a guy I used to work with. The guy was a Mormon, and he said his local religious group, where he attended, demanded that he pay a third of his income to them. He couldn't afford to do that, so they kicked him out. That seemed a bit harsh in my opinion. Now, I know this can be a difficult and sensitive subject for many church groups and their church leaders. They don't want to lose their building where they hold their meetings. They want to pay their bills for things like mortgages and electricity. Some church leaders depend on their wages just to pay for housing and basic needs like food. Early Christians met in houses, and I don't think they took up a collection to pay the preachers as we do these days. Most theologians would agree that big buildings and salaries started a few centuries after the time of Jesus' original apostles. Personally speaking, I would suggest that you meet in small groups and in houses and have casual conversations about God doing things in your life and things that you think God is showing you. I don't think you really even need typical lecture styles of preaching. I don't think you need an official meeting or church service at all. You can see some other episodes where I talk about that on YouTube, which is in Season 1, Episodes 10 and 11. For Episode 10, I debunked the whole idea that Hebrews 10:25 demands that we attend a church service, since those types of services didn't even exist until a few centuries later. For Episode 11, I reassessed typical church leadership models that most typical churches use these days, and how I showed how they contradict Jesus' teachings. I'm especially talking about his teachings that his followers shouldn't act as lords over others. You can watch those for yourselves on YouTube. Now, let's move on to today's topic of tithing. I'm going to be referring to some things I learned from a few different guys and their teachings. Surprisingly, one of these guys who taught against tithing was a Baptist preacher who had a doctorate in theology. That really shocked me when I first found this guy's book. That guy is Dr. Russell Earl Kelly, Ph.D. His book is titled, Should the Church Teach Tithing? A Theologian's Conclusions About a Taboo Doctrine. I also found some other interesting things on a blog called tithing.com, and I'll be talking about those things as well. Those things were written by a guy named Jared Bryan, and I'll talk about the things he mentioned in a moment. He wrote a book about it, but in my opinion, he still seemed to push the so-called free will giving. Yet in my opinion, it still seems a bit heavy-handed and pushy on the aspect of giving money to churches. I don't care for some of that sort of thing, and I'm still not sure if he understands God's love as it's shown in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8. So, here's a list of things I learned from Dr. Kelly and from the AI assistant from the DuckDuckGo internet search engine. Here's a few interesting points. 1. There is no legitimate tithing these days, but only free will giving. In other words, give if you want. So if you don't want to give, then don't give. This is because the Bible shows that tithing was to support the Levites and priests for activity around the temple. Yet, Jesus fulfilled all those things related to that, so that got rid of any need or any obligation for those things anymore. There's also no temple, so there's no legitimate need for priests or temple activities anymore. There hasn't been a temple since 70 AD, and Jesus fulfilled the law, so there's no more need for such things. Number 2, there should be no compulsory giving or emotional manipulation to get people to give money to church groups. There shouldn't be any attempts to use emotional pandering to try to get people to give either. That's just manipulation, and it's wrong. Number 3, Synagogues have membership fees these days, but it's only a small fee. It isn't 10% of your income. It's more like $10 to $20 a month at the most. Number 4, since there's no temple, there cannot be the other type of tithe, which is a temple tax. The temple tax was only to build the temple or for repairs to and maintenance to the temple. There's also no legitimate temple, nor is there a need for one, because Jesus fulfilled all the requirements of the law. Since Jesus fulfilled the law, there is no more need for temples or priests. Thus, there's no more need to pay tithes to pay the priests or mandatory giving to repair the temple or keep maintenance. And there's no more temple. So there's no need to try to convince people to give money for those things because they're not there anymore. Number 5, tithing was also about giving food to the Levites, and the Levites gave 10% of that food to the priests. Number 6, most of the tithe was paid by wealthy people who gave 10% of their crops and money from the massive amount of income they had from selling the crops. If the poor gave, it was likely not really all that much because they probably didn't have a lot of crops. Number 7, the poor might have been allowed to not pay because they likely didn't raise a lot of crops. The tithe was only to be food to pay the Levites and the priests. So since the poor didn't have much in the way of crops, they likely didn't pay it. Number 8, robbing God, as the book of Malachi mentions, had nothing to do with failing to pay the tithe. It was failing to see God's goodness and failure to show that goodness to other people. It's also about mistreating people while claiming to follow God, and thus they're giving God a bad reputation. Number 9, there were multiple different forms of tithes. So what tithe are people supposed to pay in churches these days? Was it the 10%, 20%, 25%, or 30%? Now, in ancient Israel, there were multiple tithes with different purposes and different schedules of when to give. The main one described in the Hebrew Bible are these in the list that I got from DuckDuckGo's AI assistant. The first tithe, Ma'aser Rishon, was a yearly 10% of produce or food, which was given to the Levites. That can be found in the Bible in the book of Numbers, chapter 18, verses 21 through 24. The second tithe, Ma'aser Shani, was a 10% portion of agriculture produce that was set aside in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the 7-year sabbatical cycle. It was set aside to be eaten in Jerusalem by the owner of the food. That's according to Deuteronomy 14, verses 22 through 27. The third type of tithe was the poor tithe, Ma'aser Ani, or Ma'aser Kasafim. In the 3rd and 6th years of the 7-year Jubilee cycle, a 10% tithe was distributed to the poor, widows, and orphans and strangers. You can see that in Deuteronomy 14, verses 28 through 29, and Deuteronomy 26:12. Yet if you see what it means, it is money given to the poor, the widows, orphans, and strangers who were in need. So the poor didn't pay into it. They were the ones who received it. Here's a list of other related obligations that the DuckDuckGo AI assistant listed. Tithe for Levites was separate from the temple tax. Levites only received the tithe, which was food, and in turn gave a tenth of that to the priests. You can see that in Numbers 18, verses 25 through 28. Temple tax was a half shekel. An annual head tax for temple maintenance is what it was. It was not produce or food, and this can be seen in Exodus 30, verse 11 through 16. This was a yearly head tax for temple upkeep that applied to every male over a certain age. Those unable to pay were sometimes exempted or given accommodations due to extreme poverty. They might have even been allowed to make monthly or weekly installments in the payments. In modern-day dollars, according to the weight of silver, that would be about $10 to $30. Yet in purchasing power, that could be anywhere from $50 to $200. Yet that was only collected once per year, not every week or every month. Even if you were poor and needed to make monthly installments, that would only be about $5 per month. So it wouldn't be 10% of your income per week. This was likely the typical modern-day equivalent to a synagogue's monthly membership fees, which are only about somewhere between $10 and $20 per month at the most. I've heard some rabbis say that you could attend a synagogue 1 or 2 times before you pay the monthly dues, yet after that you're expected to pay. It keeps the lights on and all the bills paid. Yet the poor might go to a poor man's synagogue where they would pay less, or they might not attend at all, so since they couldn't pay, they may simply have to refuse to attend. Now, timing and application of the temple tax were governed by the 7-year sabbatical cycle, and later rabbinic rules refined practical details. Some of the practical details were likely how to collect the money. It might have also been about how to be merciful to the poor or make exceptions for the poor who had difficulty paying. Then again, the rich could pay the equivalent of a few cents or dollars that could have paid for the poor in their local towns. Number 10. The tithe was abolished by Jesus' priesthood. Jesus fulfilled everything, so no other priestly duty or functions were needed. So since nothing was ever needed again, there was no need for a temple, priests, or any temple functions, activities, or practices. Therefore, no money ever needed to be collected anymore. So tithing, by default, was rendered obsolete and completely unnecessary. That gives a bit of a new meaning to the old hymn, Jesus Paid It All. But let's move on. The tithe was also abolished by the priesthood of all believers. Otherwise, we only owe money to ourselves, since we are all a priesthood of believers. So you can pass a little money from your right hand to your left if you want to pay yourself. So nothing really needs to be paid anymore. Number 12, there's no record of Jesus ever tithing. There was one occasion when he and the disciples needed to pay a Roman tax, and Jesus did a miracle there. Jesus told his disciples to go catch a fish and look in its mouth to find a coin to pay their tax. You can see that in Matthew 17, verses 24 through 27. Yet, even in those verses, Jesus makes a point that we are children of the King, or God, and shouldn't have to pay taxes. Yet in order to not offend the priests and the rulers, he told them to get the coin and pay it so no one would get upset about it. So the main point is that Jesus never seemed to tithe. So let's move on to the next point. Number 13. Some say Christians should always give generously and cheerfully. Yet that seems a bit manipulative in my opinion, and like you're trying to get more money out of people. It should be based on what you're comfortable doing. It's like giving to charities. If you want to give $10, then do it. If you want to give only $1, then do that. If you feel led to give $100 and you have the finances to do that, then do it. Yet if you're poor and cannot afford to give it all, then don't give because it's okay not to give. If anything, you're the one that we should be giving things to you in order to help you. Some people might say, God blesses a cheerful giver, or that you cannot outgive God because God will bless you in return. Well, I'm not so sure of that. Some people use those phrases to manipulate other people into giving more money in many cases. Yet I don't 100% discount that God can bless you in return, although I've had a bit of difficulty getting returns on any of my giving. Yet now that I'm learning some quantum prayer principles, I'm not going to 100% throw away those ideas. I might simply need to give it more thought and consideration. All I'm saying is that tithing isn't for us these days, and we shouldn't try to guilt people into giving more money. Well, at this time, let's move on. Number 14. A lot of the talk about tithing and giving seems to make it a means to get money out of the poor and the gullible. That's wrong. It's manipulative, dishonest, and it makes you look shady and like a crook. I'd stay far away from that as possible. Now, here's the big point that Mr. Jared Bryan made against tithing on his blog called Tithing.com. Number 1, 10% was not the minimum amount for Israel. They gave less than 10% at times. You can see that in Hebrews 7:4 and Numbers 31, verses 28 to 30. Number 2, the New Testament does not command, address, or mention tithing to the Gentiles who are unfamiliar with Jewish practices. Number 3, Jesus' own ministry operated from free will offerings. He also commanded the disciples to receive freely. You can see that in Luke 8, verses 1 to 3, and Matthew 10, verses 8 to 10. Number 4, the children of God who are his family are not taxed. They are free to give or not give. You can see that in Matthew 17:25 and Galatians 4, verse 5. Number 5, tithing was not a requirement prior to the Mosaic law, considering Jacob freely offered God 10%. You can see that in Genesis 28:20. Number 6, none of the Israelites tithed while outside of the Promised Land. You can see that in Deuteronomy 12, verse 5. Number 7, Abraham's tithe was under the Old Covenant, which was established before Moses and was also fulfilled. You can see that in Genesis 3 and Hebrews 8:13. Number 8, tithing would make giving the only spiritual gift with a minimum requirement and not spirit-led. Number 9, there are no commands to modify tithing with how we practice it today, so people make up and invent correlations to get it to fit into the church these days. Number 10, Israelites who did not grow food or raise animals did not tithe. You can see that in Leviticus 27:30. Number 11, giving is not by compulsion. You can see that in 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 through 9. Number 12, the Levitical priesthood were required to serve 25 years, and just like tithing, the New Testament doesn't call for either of these to be a requirement. Number 13, unless giving 10% is the spiritual nature of God's holiness, then it falls under the same clarification of other interim tokens in the Old Covenant that Christ fulfilled. So since it's fulfilled, it's no longer necessary. Now, I'd also like to point to a guy who I've seen on YouTube named Dr. Tom Wadsworth. I've seen several of his videos and his teachings, and I greatly appreciate his area of expertise. I think he would say that the word tithe is a reference to temple worship and not the New Testament. It's also in reference to a sacred building, sacred priests, sacred rites and rituals, and sacred sacrifice rituals. As Dr. Wadsworth points out, all these are related to the law of Moses and temple worship that is foreign to the New Testament. Yet many of us these days consider things in our church groups to be sacred, or it's our sacrifice to God. Yet all of that is foreign to the New Testament of the Bible as well. We use phrases like worship music, worship center. We have our sacred clergy, and we make our references to worship. We say things like our tithes and offerings are our worship to God. Our music is worship music. We come to the so-called house of God or a sacred building to worship God. Yet as Dr. Wadsworth points out in his doctoral writings, all of these things are completely foreign to the New Testament, the church, and Christianity. The only thing we have for Christianity these days is one anothering. We no longer have any sacred stuff or things set apart that are only for worship. All of that type of language is foreign to those of us who are New Testament believers. Here's the good news of it all. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to go to a sacred building. We don't need to sing certain types of sacred music. We don't need to have sacred lectures that are called sermons. We don't need to give massive amounts of our income away. We don't need to try to force poor folks and senior citizens on fixed incomes to give us money and force themselves into extreme poverty. Yet here's some more good news. If you like writing songs about how thankful you are for God's love, then go ahead and write those songs. You're free to do that if you want to. As a matter of fact, I like hearing those types of songs too. I've even been known to write a song or two in my time. I used to be in music ministry in traditional and contemporary style church groups. I've sang hymns and contemporary music and in some choirs. I've sang with contemporary music teams. I've also played a 6-string guitar, and I've also played bass guitar when they needed me to play in the music team. I love a lot of contemporary Christian music, and I like a lot of the old hymns too. Yet as for trying to use guilt as a means to get people to put money into your collection plates, I think that's wrong. You should refuse to use emotional pandering or any form of emotional manipulation. If you think a person has a legitimate need, then go ahead and state the need. Let the people give what they want. If they don't feel the need to give, or if they don't have any money to give, then let those folks refrain from giving. Let there be no hard feelings on anybody's part, whether they give or don't give. Let everybody have the freedom to do whatever they feel led to do or not do. We should promote freedom and liberty by way of the Holy Spirit's guidance as much as possible. That reminds me of the Bible verse, 2 Corinthians 3:17, where it says, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." We are given liberty, and that means we no longer are to be bound to heavy burdens. You could also say that we aren't forced to do things that make our lives excessively difficult. So it's no longer mandatory that we give money. It's no longer mandatory that you attend a religious meeting. You can see my further explanations of that in Season 1, Episode 10 on YouTube. I point out that Hebrews 10:25 couldn't have possibly been talking about forcing people to attend some kind of religious meeting. The reason is that those type of meetings didn't even exist until a few centuries later. So there's also no mandatory religious ritual of any type. There is only the law of love, which God helps fulfill in us when we get to know God's love and give ourselves over to it in total abandonment. Then it seems like God works his power in and through you to help show love to others. Then it seems like God works in you, through you, and as you. That's what changes your life for the better. That's what also makes good things flow out of your life in an almost effortless manner. It's because God will be doing it through you. That is something that cannot be done by merely trying to get people to conform to a code of conduct or religious rituals. Giving money to a church or religious group doesn't automatically mean you'll become a better behaved person either. So even if you don't believe a single thing I say about tithing, study it for yourself and read the book by Dr. Russell Kelly. I'd also suggest you try to look into the issue of God's love, then see if these things seem to make sense, if love really is God's nature. See if it aligns with God's love. You might not be sure that love is God's nature, but even my theology professor said that it most definitely is God's nature. I've also heard theologians say that God's nature is primary theology, and if you discard primary doctrines like that, you discard the core of who God is and what the Bible is. So even if you don't believe me on that point, I'd challenge you to go to a theology professor you trust and ask them about it. Ask them if love is God's nature. I think you might be surprised at the answer you get. Now back to the issue of giving money. I heard a guy once give a very interesting comment about it. The guy was Chuck Smith, who was the founder of Calvary Chapel. Here's what he said, quote, "Where God guides, God provides," end quote. Sometimes he would elaborate on that and say things like, if God isn't providing, then maybe God isn't guiding in that direction that you're considering. So I guess maybe we all need to look for those areas where God is providing or will provide if we ask. Then we should move toward those things where he provides the means. You might also want to ask around if people will be willing to provide in some area to see if the means are available. Now, here's the point where I want to be openly honest with you folks about my life and finances for this show. I'm going to tell you how I can afford to make this show and put it on the Grace Awakening Network. They use the acronym GAN as an abbreviation for the network, GAN. Paul Gray's group had the idea of taking Paul Gray's old videos and putting them on the GAN network. They had a little bit of difficulty doing the video editing on Paul Gray's videos to put them on the network. Now, I'm good at video editing, so I figured that I could help with that. I wanted to put my show on GAN on their network too, but it would take $250 per month. That would make it one episode per week for the whole month. I couldn't afford $250 because I'm in a low-income bracket and I'm on the food stamp program just to afford to live. I then found most people do video editing for shows like Grace to All with Paul Gray for about maybe $125 a month or $250 for 4 episodes. So all of us folks got to talking and we figured we could make an even trade-off. I would do the video editing for the episodes of Grace to All with Paul Gray, and I would get episodes of my show on GAN every other week. That would trade off the $125 of editing services for $125 for my show being on every other week. That's how I get my show on the GAN network. Yet that also leaves me with a show where I make absolutely no money from the show except for donations. My donations have pretty much totally dried up, so I do this as a labor of love to help folks learn about tough issues. Yet one way you can donate to support this show is by purchasing a copy of my book. My book is titled Journal to a Journey. You can find the book on Amazon's website. The book is available as an on-demand paperback or as a Kindle ebook. The paperback is listed at $9.95 and the Kindle version is listed at $7.95. If you can't find it, put a comment in the comments section of my YouTube videos, and I'll see if I can get you a link to it. By the way, the book is also available on Barnes & Noble's website as well. Another way you can help me is simply to pray for me that God will guide me and help me with this show. You could also help me by making a comment on this episode on YouTube and tell me that you like the show. You could even comment by using a smiley face emoji. You can also click the thumbs up like button on YouTube. That helps a lot as well. Now, I'd also like to inform you folks that I have a private Facebook group for this show. It's especially for folks who have tough questions they'd like to ask about deconstruction and reassessing their views. It's also for seeing what's new with the show and what episodes are coming up. I sure wanted to ask questions in private settings when I was reassessing my views or deconstructing. If my family knew about this stuff, they would verbally assault me for having different views than them. So I made this group so folks can ask questions in private. That way their family can't see their questions and get verbally abusive toward them. If you have other things you're interested in, you could mention those in that group too. Such as, you could let me know you're interested in doing a live stream on YouTube. You could get in there and ask questions in the chat if you wanted to. Just let me know if you're interested. I might even set up private videos on Patreon where I teach theology lessons and the pros and cons for those lessons. As for now, I think I'm almost out of time, so let me give you a quick word of encouragement. Let's all share God's love with each other, as well as the freedom and liberty that goes along with it. We need to allow people to look into these matters for themselves and let them look into it with freedom. Let's also step away from the bondage and things that put us under heavy burdens or put heavy demands on us. I believe that Jesus came to set us free from those types of things. You see, you are loved and you are free. So go ahead and bask in that love and freedom because God loves you with an unconditional love. 1 Corinthians 13:5 says, love, or God in His love, doesn't hold your wrongs against you. God keeps loving you no matter what happens in your life. So on that note, I'd like to say that I hope to see you in the next episode of the Agape Guy Show. Goodbye for now.